Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Before we begin, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, they reached a settlement with the United States government, where they implemented new policy meant to dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators, meaning I have to ensure everybody understands that this video is not meant for children. It's not advertised towards kids, it is not marketed towards kids. Doctor Who is a family show that kids can watch, but this video, as with all the videos on my channel, are looking at it from an adult perspective, so viewer discretion is advised. With that out of the way, it is the 4th of February 2021. We are starting a look at the middle installment of the Key to Time trilogy, Jonathan Clements, The Destroyer of Delights, starting with part 1. And one thing I will like really out of the gate here is the way that Clements characterizes the Black Guardian. The Black Guardian has appeared on audio and in television multiple times now. And and always in a villainous role. However, Clements doesn't portray him as necessarily evil. He's not good. He represents chaos, and chaos is a bad thing. However, he and the White Guardian are two sides of the same coin, essentially. Both beings meant to essentially hold the universe accountable to for its continued existence, because you can't have order without chaos, and you can't have chaos without order. They're two linked concepts, and that's actually quite important because the increased entropy and the death of the universe means no more of either. So you have all of this stuff with the Doctor talking to the Black Guardian, and we find out that, entropy is rapidly increasing. Instead of sort of the slow burn of the entire season of Key to Time, this trilogy and story in particular goes quickly. It's a matter of, life and death here. The Key to Time is breaking, and that doesn't present dangers. The Doctor, Amy, and the Black Guardian go through several possible places where one of the next segment they're looking for is, and they can't find it. One segment is revealed to be in a living form, like Princess Astra was, in the Armageddon Factor, and the Doctor and Amy get separated. So they spend a lot of this episode apart, which is interesting. And we're in the 9th century, specifically in the Middle East. I believe it's in Sudan. And there's definitely some interesting stuff exploring in ancient culture. Now, this is under a specific caliphate. Now, full disclosure, don't know the history, or at least it's not a part of history that I personally am well acquainted with. So that could mean that this is all being could be taken out of context, and especially because there is there's apparently a djinn involved in the prince, and it's all about a sandstorm. Amy is separated and made a slave. The Doctor is kind of just trying to, I guess, help out. It's one of those things where the Doctor isn't necessarily the isn't the isn't there to save her. She kind of gets herself into scrapes, mainly because, well, there is no reason for her to know these things. She doesn't know the world or how really it all works. She was just born, which is definitely an interesting sort of plot. You also see a lot. You see the Doctor. Basically, it becomes kind of a historical adventure. Now, there's a thing called the Destroyer of Delights. Now, we don't actually know what the Destroyer of Delights is. And there's this prince who takes a liking to Amy, and you have everything be this sort of different type, this very, very different type of story. It's a weird little thing, where the characters are sort of different, and you have things differently. You also have different. You have a lot of different sort of things, where the story kind of stands. It's a weird little thing, where the story goes on to be interesting and be different. It's a really, really good story. It's a really, really good opening where you get the ideas, where the story can go. So we start up something like there, and something very, very different happens. So overall, I am going to have to give part 1 of the Key to Time, the Destroyer of Delights, a 9 out of 10, because it's a much stronger start than Judgment of Iskar was, but it's just a lot better. Okay, it is the 5th of February 2021. I just finished listening to part 2 of The Destroyer of Delights. Now, this episode doesn't actually tell us what the Destroyer of Delights is, but it does set up quite a few things. Mainly it's a very, very different type of story where we are casting the White Guardian in perhaps the worst possible light. It's this very, very different it's a very different sort of story, because um, be because of sort of what it's kind of meant to be. um it's 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 this it's this sort of turning on its head of the White Guardian as sort of the villain who both Guardians have lost their power, and um and is one of those stories where the ending, we're all building, well, we're not really at the ending, this is only the second episode, where we are building up to sort of a different different thing the story than would usually do, because it it plays itself as this very different thing. It's just this very, very different different sort of story, because of sort of how much weirdness is going on. Like, we're playing an alien invasion story straight as sort of a as a different as a different sort of as this sort of as a different sort of story where you see everything all around what sort of the story wanted to be. It's very very, very a very, very different sort of thing. A different sort of thing that the story wanted to be. It's kind of a weird sort of thing, because you have what is essentially its own story built around this different this idea of the Guardians being in trouble, and Amy once again learning to become more human, that becomes the complete sort of thing that it might want to be with with Amy again becoming human, sort of realizing slavery is bad, but not quite realizing why it's bad. It's this kind of surreal thing where you don't get to see quite what happens to her, but you definitely get, the whole, a lot of the ideas surrounding them, as the characters just kind of kind of has to happen. It's very much this different this different sort of thing. It's this weird little ending where things, where things sort of build up to a halfway point that isn't quite as good as that first one, because that first episode hit, and it hit really, really well. It had the characters there. It made them seem important. It made things work, and it made the characters have to examine themselves in a way where you really don't always get to see that. So I really like what it's doing. It's something that Jonathan Clements, the author of this story, does quite a lot. He plays around with the characters, and you have them being how weird, being intentionally weird and intentionally different. So, you have something there. So overall, I'm going to give part 2 of The Destroyer of Delights an 8 out of 10. Alright, it is the 6th of February, 2021. I just finished listening to part 3 of The Key to Time, The Destroyer of Delights. This episode is excellent. As is all this entire story. This entire story is just really good. Jonathan Clements plays around, takes decides on a theme, takes that theme, plays around with it, and lets the listener really get into what he's trying to do with this story. We are playing around with, this is basically the Black and White Guardian interfere with history, and essentially the White Guardian isn't the good guy here. The dude is Machiavellian, trying to get power, is ready to start killing people and making things worse for everyone, just because he needs that, he wants his power back, and because, well, he can't really get his power back without actually actively taking the time to really do anything. He's relying on other people. He kind of has to rely on the chaotic nature of other people, is perhaps a better way to put it. You get to see just this man slowly lose his mind over the course of 3 episodes. And then you have the Black Guardian, on the complete other hand, being the one who thinks he knows what he's doing, but doesn't. It's you put these two characters who are polar opposites, and essentially have them try to figure out a solution to their problems, and that is where conflict occurs. And I love it. It's a smart way of telling this story and allowing a story like this to breathe and basically be a full story while not exactly forcing, the Doctor into anything. And this is a story that also kind of reflects on the Doctor and Amy's relationship. Now, this relationship, up to this point, has only lasted 7 episodes, comprising 1 3/4 of a story. Not 2 stories, but there's already a lot here between the two where you get you get to have something so great with them, where it's a bunch of changes, and Amy as a character is slowly learning how things work, and there's this idea where she's basically a slave to the Doctor. She makes herself a slave to the Doctor, we think, and that's definitely interesting. And it is interesting because it creates this personality clash with the 5th Doctor, because the 5th Doctor, being Peter Davison, is the one Doctor who you'd think who wouldn't want his companions to be like him. He of course cares for them, and they're his companions, and but he doesn't want them to be him. He wants them to think for themselves and be all for creating their own experiences and understanding the world and the universe and showing them these wonders. Yeah, that's not what the 5th Doctor and Amy's relationship can be. You kind of got that in the last story, The Judgment of Iskar, with how Amy and Zara were played off of one another, and it comes back here in an important way, in a very important way, because of how different these characters must be, and who they represent. Having Amy be there to provide this important, if sometimes hard to listen to, foil is really important. You also have a robot invasion plot coming here. The fact that the segments are being difficult to find, and just that these characters are having just one heck of a time trying to find something where we really don't know where things will be. This is a story. You don't ever actually get what the Destroyer of Delights is. But we do know that it is terrible. And there's a lot of there's a lot going on here where the story where the story is built around this whole idea, the whole idea of having these characters be there and telling them what needs to be happening. This is such a different story where you don't get to see everything that it kind of wants to be, Um, but it is really, really solid. This is as a trilogy of stories. This is a trilogy that is often maligned by Big Finish fans, and I can't see why. It's actually really, really good and really, really fun, and I honestly love listening to it. So overall, I'm gonna have to give part 3 of the Destroyer of Lights of Delights. Let's try that again. I'm gonna give part 3 of the Key to Time, the Destroyer of Delights, an 8 out of 10. All right, it is the 7th of February 2021. I just finished listening to part 4 of the Key to Time, the Destroyer of Delights. This final episode is a brilliant send-off to a great story. Now, one thing that you may have noticed in the last couple episodes is that I actually didn't talk a lot about the search for the 5th segment of the Key to Time, which is the premise of this entire story. And I say that because really, the most fun about this story is the Guardians fighting with one another. But this is the episode where we actually get to have that ending of, here's where the 5th segment was all along, and it was a mystery that needed to be solved, and the way it's actually solved, I think, is great. You have it actually not being a thing that needed disappearing or anything, but it's a segment that hadn't come into existence yet because the Black Guardian hadn't created it by accident yet, which is this there is the entire story all about where the story is ending and going right towards there was this there was this entire story built around the spaceship and finding the spaceship, and this entire story is very Doctor Who does Arabian Nights. Now, we already had that done in 1001 Nights, though that would actually be released later than this one, but of course it takes place earlier in the marathon, and well, I think 1001 Nights does it better by virtue of being more of a story itself. I will say that that the Destroyer of Delights also does it really, really well, because it sort of provides an origin for those sort of stories. There's you think you would see it coming when they're talking a lot about 40, and 40 meaning a lot, and there's a line in this episode where this cave has 40 thieves, which is, of course, a reference to Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. It's all it's all of just this very, very different this very, very different sort of story where you get the entire plot all about all about what this story is meant to be. It's a different a different story because you see the end, and it ends really, really well with the segment found the Doctor and Amy going off. Amy kind of coming to terms with her existence, and they're off to find that final segment, not quite knowing that that this is a story where the characters aren't the powers of the Guardians aren't back, and the Guardians actually meeting each other in this episode is also a work of genius, because the implication is that they hadn't really met before this, and having them meet means they sort of go at each other, so that, like, this idea of that they don't really know each other, which I think is interesting and definitely it's a different sort of story because of that, where you don't have everything going on. It's this very different story, just because of what it means and what it does. It's so different because of that. There is that different need for something, and you don't actually see, you don't really see this end right, but it ends really, really well, in such a way that these characters feel real, and you really get to see who they are, what they mean, what the story means to them, where it's going. So you get to see, and you get to see different things done, so in such a way that you don't always see in audio. So overall, I'm gonna have to give part 4 of Key to Time, The Destroyer of Delights, a 9 out of 10. That being said, we added the scores and averaged them out to give The Key to Time, The Destroyer of Delights a final score of 8.5 out of 10, meaning it's a step up after the first installment of the trilogy, although by 1 point. Still, both stories are great, and hopefully the final story will continue to be great. So, thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we take a look at the concluding story in this trilogy, The Key to Time, The Chaos Pool.